Okay, so in chapter 24, we're going to finish this up. We left off talking about how speciation can occur due to mistakes in cell division in plants. And so that's where we left off. It's called this polyploidy. And we remember, just a quick little thing, we talked about speciation, the things that can cause speciation to happen. There was sympatric speciation, which means that they occurs all together, so the organisms living together can actually diverge into two different species, or it can be geographic separation. And so we went through and I gave examples of that, allopatric and sympatric speciation, this with the plants as with sympatric speciation. So let's continue on with this. So habitat differentiation and sexual selection. So sympatric speciation can also result from the appearance of new ecological niches. So when you have new habitats and new parts of the ecosystem open up that are now usable, or the organisms can play a new role, and so you can get sympatric speciation where the organisms use and different parts of the ecosystem. In cichlid fish, sympatric speciation has resulted from non-random mating due to sexual selection. And I'm going to go through an example of this in class. All right. All right, so I'm going to put this here and we're going to go through an example. All right, so let's summarize the allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. So in allopatric speciation, a new species forms while geographically, they're geographically isolated. So there's some kind of barrier separating them from the original population, the apparent population. Versus in sympatric speciation, you have a reproductive barrier usually. And that means that they can live right together in one area, and the reproductive barrier isolates part of the population, a subset of the population, without geographic separation from the parent species. And so that's the example I was using with the polyploidy in plants. That can happen with the plants living right next to each other. So an example of speciation can happen in this process called adaptive radiation. It's the evolution of diversely adapted species from a common ancestor upon introduction to new environmental opportunities. So I'm going to give an example of the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiian Islands were formed like the Galapagos Islands. So remember, the Galapagos Islands were underwater volcanic islands. So they were hardened and nothing lived there. The lava hardened and nothing lived there. And over time, weathering and erosion occurs. So you got soil, and then seeds could blow in, and there are plants, and now there are animals. And now there are species on the Galapagos Islands that are found nowhere else, not even on the closest mainland, South America, that they only live on the Galapagos Islands. And so therefore, where did those organisms come from? They came from the mainland, from other areas, but then they have slowly adapted through natural selection to their respective islands. The same thing happened with the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiian Islands here in America are also volcanic islands. So at one point nothing lived there, and again now there are species that live just on the Hawaiian Islands. So let me show you an example here. This is a map of the Hawaiian Islands, and here are various species of plants that the seeds have blown in from other areas, and over millions, notice here, millions of years, they have diverge into very different species. Kind of like when I talked about the wild mustard seed with artificial selection, and how we have lots of different, broccoli and cauliflower and so on from that one wild mustard plant. Same kind of idea here. All right, so they've adapted, and natural selection has occurred based upon the conditions on the various islands. So we can actually really in-depth study species now, studying the genetics of speciation with the explosion of genomics. We can actually sequence and look at specific genes, sequencing them in the terms of the orders of the A's, T's, C's, and G's to actually see the differences and look at speciation on the genetic and the molecular level. And then last but not least is the tempo. When you talk about tempo, it's like the timing of speciation. So all we have to go on from when we weren't alive and don't have records is the fossil records. The fossil record includes many episodes in which new species appear suddenly in a geologic stratum. This is a layer. Stratum is singular. And persist essentially unchanged through several strata. All right, that's the plural form, so that's layers. That's the singular. And then apparently disappear. So let me talk about what that means. So sedimentary rock is layered rock, so you can actually see the layers. So here's the person on the top here, and these are the layers, and this is the oldest layer, and this is the newest. We can see the exposed layers when you look at something like the Grand Canyon, where the Colorado River has eroded the rock and expose the layers. So here's the river, all right, and it has eroded this rock, and you can see the layers there. That's called strata, or one layer is called stratum. And how this relates to the fossil record is that sedimentary rock is formed in the water. And so if you have an organism die, so the organism dies, the bacteria and decomposers decompose the fleshy parts of the organism, so only the bones are left. Sediment comes on top of it and buries it, and it's in water, so minerals and so on are dissolved in the water, get into the pores and harden that bone, and that sediment over time pressurizes and forms rock. And then on top of that, you might have another organism die. Same thing happens. The body erodes by decomposer, or body is decomposed by bacteria, and you leave just the hard parts. Sediments come on top of it. The minerals get into the pores of the bones. It hardens, and you get this layers of rock on top of each other. So that's this here. So what happens is it says that you can, in the fossil record, we see. It says new species appear suddenly in a geologic stratum. So let's say species A is right here, all right? So it's not in this one, and boom, it's in this layer. Persist essentially unchanged through several strata. So let's say it's unchanged here, so it stays, they look the same. All right, the fossils through several strata, and then suddenly disappear. So they're not in that strata. All right, so that's what that means. So then these two scientists, Eldridge and Gould, coined the term what they call punctuated equilibrium. To describe periods of apparent stasis. That means like unchanging, all right, that stays the same. Punctuated or kind of interrupted by sudden change. So hence the name punctuated equilibrium. So this model contrasts with a model called of gradual change, or called gradualism in a species' existence. And so that's what this picture down here is showing you here. So so here's gradualism, and here's punctuated equilibrium. Now this is figure, you're going to want to kind of look in your figure in your textbook because it's color-coded. Okay, but I'm going to show you up here. So gradualism, if we look at the color coding of gradualism, this is time. So this is oldest to newest, all right, kind of like in the strata of the rock. So that's why it says time going this way. oldest down here. So if we look at gradualism, here's a fossil in the fossil record. Then we go up into another strata, a newer strata, and now look at, we have some changes. All right, so that's what this line represents, is the divergence into different species. One species into two by the ways in which we just talked about in the previous video. And then we have a gradual change through the strata, hence the name gradualism. Punctuated equilibrium is when here's the fossil here, and now notice here it diverges. Here's two forks on the road here, and boom, we get a sudden change followed by many years of no change. All right, so sudden change, punctuated, and then we have no change for a long period of time. And then here we get sudden change, and then this guy, notice that this guy is the same as this guy here. All right, so boom, so this guy stays the same, and then later on, all of a sudden, the fossil record, we still have this guy here, but now we have a new guy. So therefore, he seems to just suddenly appear, and that's punctuated equilibrium. And so these are two models of how speciation occurs and how we can read the fossil record. Now the thing is that these guys can be related. So like, for instance, let's say from time here to the top is like 3 million years. So then let's say from here to here is, I don't know, 200,000 years. So 200,000 years compared to all of the history of the Earth is very, very small amount of time. For us, 200,000 years seems like a long period of time. But so this could still be a very long period of time, but overall, over the whole history here of the fossil record, it's a very small piece. So my question is everything that ever lived on Earth fossilized? And the answer is no. No, the organism has to die in the right spot and be covered with sediment, and all of that stuff has to, everything has to align to be fossilized. So there are a lot of things that haven't been fossilized. So we're constantly finding new fossils and using that information to help us to understand the history of life on Earth. And so therefore, it might change things that we find, may change our thinking. So my question to you, if this is 200,000 years, if you look between these two, could gradualism have happened between here and just not been fossilized? And absolutely it could. And it may be that you might find something that does that. And so therefore, so punctuated equilibrium is explaining here what has happened in the fossil record, and as we find new things, we can make more sense of that. So it's two ways to explain the speciation and what has happened in the fossil record. Okay. So let's go back down here. So new species arise from reproductive isolation over time. So we just talked about that, which can involve scales of hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. So I just talked about that. Or speciation can occur rapidly through mechanisms such as polyploidy in plants. So polyploidy in plants can happen very rapidly. A mistake in meiosis, and boom, you can get a new species just like that. And plants can reproduce themselves, and so therefore can create a new species just with one mistake in cell division. So if we look at this last picture here, this is figure, 2420, figure 2420 in our book, and it just shows you the history and evolution of the horse. And so we have, this is over time, so time is this way, this is most recent, all right, so these are periods in history. And just to give you an idea, let's see here, this is 11,500 years ago, YA for years ago, and this is 55.8 million years ago. And so just to give you an idea of the timeline, and your book gives you examples of when these, how many millions of years ago these were. But what I want to do is highlight the evolution of our modern horse. So here's our modern horse right here, and here's the ancestor. And so we're going to kind of look at its path. So it goes like this, all right, and up like this, and over like this, and all the way up here, and then we get a divergence here. All right, and that is our modern horse. And so what this means is that this is kind of like, looks like a bush, how you read this. Like that. All right. So every time you see a fork in the road, that means that organisms of this species diverged. For some reason, they either got geographically separated and so on, and then the environment was different, so they accumulated through natural selection differences to a point where now if they come together, they won't breed, and so they become different species. So that's how you read this. Every time you see that fork in the road, that's what it means. So here's your different species. Then notice here, a fork in the road, all right? And then another fork in the road, and so on and so forth until eventually we get to our modern day horse. And so what this picture is showing you is not only as you go from the fossil record from ancestors of the horse to the modern day horse, it gets greater in size. So there's a trend towards, whoops, I'm off the thing, a trend towards, let's put here, larger size. All right, that's the first trend. The second thing is it's showing you here next to it is their feet, all right, and their hooves. And so and this is the modern day here. So notice here these guys have toes, and then it's gone to hooves. And so we also see a trend in a reduced number of toes. And then the third thing here, it's kind of hard to see here, this is the teeth. All right, and so notice the teeth are like kind of flatter and bigger. And so they have a trend towards teeth that are modified for grazing. So they're flatter, able to break down and the tough grasses and things like that it eats. And so that's our trend. And so this is how you read an evolutionary tree. And in chapter 25, we're going to talk a little bit more about evolutionary trees and look at relatedness between organisms.